Inside Saddam Hussein's empire of fear, the truth you were never told. For more than 2 decades, one man's shadow ruled over Iraq, a figure whose name alone could silence a room. Saddam Hussein rose from poverty to power with ruthless ambition, building an empire held together by fear, violence, and absolute control. Behind the glittering palaces and patriotic speeches lay a nation suffocating under surveillance, secret prisons, and unimaginable cruelty. His rule shaped not only Iraq's destiny, but also the course of modern Middle Eastern history, leaving behind scars that still ache today. Tonight, we step deep inside that darkness, from the rise of a young revolutionary to the fall of a tyrant whose reign ended in a bunker beneath the earth. This is not just a story about power, it's about the cost of fear. Saddam was born in 1937 into hardship. His father vanished before his birth, and his stepfather was known for his violence. Poverty, humiliation, and resentment marked his childhood. But within that suffering grew a desire, not just to survive, but to dominate. His uncle, Khairallah Tulfa, a former army officer and passionate Arab nationalist, became his greatest influence. From him, Saddam learned 2 things: the language of power and the danger of mercy. By the time he was 20, he had joined the Ba'ath Party, a movement promising unity, strength, and revenge against colonial domination. In 1959, Saddam took part in an attempt to assassinate Iraq's prime minister. The plot failed, and he fled to Syria, then Egypt. There, while studying law, he began to understand that force alone could not guarantee power. It required control, loyalty, and fear. When he returned to Iraq in the mid-1960s, he was ready to apply those lessons. The Ba'ath Party seized power in 1968. Saddam was not yet president, but he quickly became its engine. He took charge of the intelligence apparatus and began eliminating rivals one by one. He understood that fear was more effective than friendship, and so he built a system where loyalty was rewarded and hesitation was fatal. By 1979, when President Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr resigned under health reasons, the nation already knew who held the real power. Within days, Saddam Hussein became president of Iraq, and the transformation of the nation into a kingdom of terror began. Shortly after taking power, he gathered hundreds of top officials in a lavish hall inside the presidential palace. The event began like any other party meeting, until a man was brought in, trembling, forced to read a confession implicating his colleagues in a conspiracy. As the names were read aloud, guards dragged men from their seats. Some pleaded, others fainted, but no one dared speak. The entire scene was recorded and later broadcast across Iraq. It was a spectacle of fear, a message that no one, no matter how powerful, was untouchable. That day marked the birth of Saddam's reign of terror. He created a network of intelligence agencies, the Mukhabarat, Amn al-Qas, and Amn al-Am, each spying not only on the people, but on each other. Neighbors began to fear one another, children learned not to speak at home, and even jokes about the president could cost a life. In Saddam's Iraq, silence was safety. He ruled through loyalty, but loyalty bought through fear never lasts. To maintain control, Saddam looked for enemies, both real and imagined. When internal dissent quieted, he turned his attention outward. In 1980, believing Iran to be weak after its revolution, he launched an invasion. What he thought would be a swift victory turned into an 8-year nightmare. The Iran-Iraq War became one of the longest and most devastating conflicts of the 20th century. Trenches filled with young men barely old enough to shave, cities burned, and families vanished. When the tide began to turn against Iraq, Saddam's desperation grew. He authorized the use of chemical weapons, mustard gas, sarin, and tabun, despite global treaties banning them. Villages along the front lines were blanketed in poison. Soldiers and civilians alike collapsed where they stood, their lungs seared by invisible death. The world condemned it, but few nations acted. For Saddam, the war became a laboratory of terror. The chemical attacks he unleashed on Iranian troops would soon be turned against his own people. In 1986, he began the Anfal campaign, a systematic assault on Iraq's Kurdish population. Entire villages were wiped off the map. Men were executed. Women and children disappeared into detention camps. Over 4,000 villages were destroyed. When Iraqi aircraft dropped nerve agents on the Kurdish town of Halabja in March 1988, more than 5,000 people died in a single day. The images that emerged from that tragedy, mothers clutching infants, families frozen where they fell, revealed a horror the world could barely comprehend. By the end of the war with Iran in 1988, nearly 1 million lives were lost, and Iraq was left economically broken. Yet Saddam emerged claiming victory, his grip on power tighter than ever. Fear had become the foundation of the state. Then came 1990, and another gamble. Saddam ordered the invasion of Kuwait, triggering the Gulf War. The U.S.-led coalition struck back swiftly, destroying much of Iraq's military capability. When the war ended, Iraq faced crushing sanctions that crippled its economy and starved its people. But instead of weakening Saddam's rule, the sanctions only deepened the suffering of ordinary Iraqis. Food and medicine became scarce, hospitals ran out of supplies, children died of preventable diseases. Meanwhile, Saddam lived lavishly, building new palaces and maintaining his private armies. When uprisings erupted in the south and north of Iraq after the war, Saddam's response was merciless. His tanks rolled into Shia and Kurdish cities, crushing entire neighborhoods. The golden domes of holy shrines were shelled, and thousands of civilians were buried in mass graves. The message was the same as it had been since 1979. Disobedience would be erased, generation by generation. Throughout the 1990s, Iraq became a nation locked in silence. The secret police listened from the shadows, schools taught blind loyalty, and fear became the air everyone breathed. Yet, even as the nation withered, Saddam clung to power. In 2003, after years of tension and suspicion, the United States launched the invasion of Iraq. The justification, weapons of mass destruction, was never proven, but the war began nonetheless. Within 3 weeks, Baghdad fell. The statue of Saddam toppled in Firdos Square, a moment broadcast worldwide as the symbol of his downfall. But the man himself vanished. For months, he eluded capture, hiding in tunnels and farmhouses near his birthplace. When U.S. soldiers finally found him in December 2003, crouched inside a narrow underground hole, the so-called spider hole, he looked nothing like the iron ruler he had once been. Disheveled, defeated, and silent, Saddam Hussein's empire of fear had literally collapsed beneath the earth. His trial in 2005 for crimes against humanity exposed the full scale of his brutality, the executions, the chemical attacks, the mass graves. Yet even then, Saddam remained defiant. He refused to acknowledge the court's authority, insisting he was still Iraq's true leader. In December 2006, just before sunrise, he was executed by hanging. His final words, "There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger," echoed through a chaotic room where guards jeered and filmed the moment on a cell phone. Dear friends, Saddam Hussein's reign ended not with dignity, but with a reflection of what he had built: chaos, vengeance, and hatred. His empire of fear crumbled, but the wounds he left behind still shape Iraq today. His story reminds us that no amount of power can silence the truth forever, and that the louder fear grows, the closer it comes to destroying the one who wields it.